Most people can name the famous American cars, but the best surprises are the ones nobody talks about. Today we're counting down 25 underrated American cars that deserved way more respect than they got. Quick question before we start. What's the most underrated American car you've ever driven? Or always wanted to drive? Drop it in the comments, and let's see if it shows up on this list. Number 25. Buick Reatta. The Buick Reatta is underrated because it doesn't fit the box people expect from Buick, and it doesn't fit the box people expect from an American sports car either. It's not a Corvette rival, not a muscle coupe, and not a traditional luxury cruiser. It's something stranger and more ambitious. A hand-assembled, two-seat Buick that tried to prove the brand could do modern style, modern tech, and personal luxury cool in the late 1980s and early 1990s, right as the industry was shifting under everyone's feet. The Reatta's engine tells you exactly what Buick was aiming for. Most Reattas used Buick's 3.8-liter V6, a torquey, smooth power plant, known more for durability and everyday strength than for high-rev drama. It wasn't built to chase sports car soundtracks. It was built to deliver relaxed, confident acceleration, the kind you feel in normal driving, easy passing power, smooth cruising, and that effortless character that makes a car feel expensive even when it isn't trying to be flashy. The Reatta's real performance wasn't about lap times. It was about making the whole driving experience feel refined and modern. And that modern goal shows up everywhere else too. The Reatta was front-wheel drive, which makes some enthusiasts dismiss it instantly. But it also made the car easy to drive and stable, especially in bad weather. More importantly, the Reatta was packed with ideas. It had a distinctive low, clean shape, a cockpit-like interior, and one of the most memorable tech experiments of the era, Buick's touchscreen-style control interface, which felt like science fiction for its time. It's the kind of feature that sounds normal now, but back then, it was a huge swing, an American brand trying to make the interior feel like the future. So why is it underrated? Because it arrived in a confused market. Two-seat cars were expected to be either hardcore sports machines or flashy status symbols, and the Reatta was neither. It was subtle. It was thoughtful. It was a personal luxury coupe, convertible meant for people who wanted something unique without shouting. That made it hard to explain and hard to sell, especially at its price point. It didn't help that Buick buyers weren't necessarily asking for a two-seater, and sports car buyers weren't necessarily shopping Buick. But that's exactly why the Reatta deserves more respect today. It represents a rare moment when Buick tried to break its own stereotypes with something genuinely different, hand-built, stylish, tech-forward, and quietly cool. The Reatta is underrated because it wasn't trying to be a legend. It was trying to be a new direction. And even though the market didn't fully follow, the car still stands out as one of the most unusual and ambitious American two-seaters of its era. Number 24. Dodge Neon ACR, 1990s. The Dodge Neon ACR is one of the most misunderstood performance cars America ever sold, because the name Neon instantly makes people think of cheap commuting, cracked dashboards, and high school parking lots. And that's exactly why the ACR version is so underrated, because it was never built to be cool on purpose. It was built to win. ACR literally stood for American Club Racer, and Dodge didn't hide what it was. This wasn't a body kit or a stripe package. It was a factory cheat code for people who cared about lap times more than image. What made it special is that Dodge treated it like a real competition option. You got sharper suspension tuning and hardware upgrades that mattered in the real world, stuff like stiffer components and better braking. The kind of improvements that show up immediately the first time you attack an off-ramp or throw the car into an autocross slalom. Depending on the year, the ACR package could include pieces like adjustable dampers, upgraded bars, and other track-minded bits that regular buyers would never notice, but weekend racers would absolutely pay for. And here's the part that makes the ACR feel almost mythical today. It was sold right from the showroom, at a price normal people could actually reach. The Neon's platform also helped it. It was light, simple, and willing. That low weight meant the car didn't need huge horsepower to feel alive, and the chassis had that raw, tossable energy that made it perfect for tight courses. In autocross, where quick transitions and responsiveness matter more than top speed, the ACR could punch way above its class. It became the kind of car that embarrassed faster machines because it was easier to place, easier to rotate, and easier to drive at the limit without fear. And the biggest reason it stayed underrated is psychological. Most enthusiasts never wanted to admit a Neon could be legit, because performance culture loves prestige. It's easy to respect a Corvette or a Viper. It's harder to respect a scrappy economy car that shows up with steel wheels and an attitude. But the ACR built its reputation the old way, by showing up every weekend, being abused, and still delivering. That's why the people who know it don't talk about it like a joke. They talk about it like a tool. A cheap, honest, strangely brilliant tool that proved you don't need a legendary badge to build something that can genuinely compete. Number 23. Chevrolet Corvair 1960s. The Chevrolet Corvair is underrated because its reputation got frozen in place by a story people love repeating, and almost nobody takes the time to separate the myth from the machine. Say Corvair, and the conversation immediately turns into controversy, headlines, and old arguments, like the car's entire identity is a courtroom drama. But if you step back and look at what it actually was, the Corvair becomes one of the boldest, most interesting American cars of the 1960s, and it deserves more credit for that alone. This was Detroit doing something genuinely un-Detroit. Rear engine, air-cooled, flat six, compact dimensions, a totally different layout from the big front-engine, rear-drive sedans that defined the era. Chevrolet basically built a mainstream American car using a set of ideas that felt more European than Midwestern. That's not a small deal. It wasn't just styling. It was a full philosophical swing, different weight distribution, different packaging, different driving character, and a different kind of sound and feel from the engine. And here's what's easy to miss. The Corvair wasn't just a weird engineering experiment. It had real appeal. In its sportier trims, especially the Monza, the Corvair offered a light, eager vibe that made it feel more playful than many American cars of the time. It was compact without feeling cheap, stylish without trying too hard, and it had a personality that stood out in a sea of chrome. Even more underrated, the Corvair dipped into performance with versions like the turbocharged Spider, which sounds almost unbelievable when you remember this was still the 1960s, an American compact offering factory turbocharging like it belonged in the future. Yes, early models had handling quirks, and yes, the safety debate became part of its legacy. But that legacy often gets simplified into, the car was bad, which isn't accurate or fair. Plenty of cars from that era had compromises and odd behavior at the limit, because tire technology and suspension understanding were still evolving fast. The Corvair's bigger problem was that it became a symbol, and symbols don't get nuanced conversations, they get slogans. What makes the Corvair truly underrated is the what-if factor. What if the story had been allowed to stay about innovation instead of scandal? What if more people remembered it as the car that proved America could build something genuinely different and pull it off with style? The Corvair is a reminder that sometimes the most important American cars aren't the loudest icons. Sometimes they're the daring experiments that took risks, got misunderstood, and still left fingerprints on automotive history. Number 22. Ford Contour SVT, late 1990s. The Ford Contour SVT is the kind of underrated car that exposes a bias in car culture. If it doesn't look like a hero, most people never bother to discover whether it drives like one. On the surface, it's just a compact family sedan from the late 1990s. Rounded styling, 4 doors, the kind of shape you'd expect to see blending into traffic. But SVT didn't build it to win looks contests. They built it to feel sharp at real-world speeds, on real-world roads, for people who actually enjoy driving instead of just talking about it. The formula was simple and surprisingly serious. Take Ford's small, European-flavored platform, then tighten everything up until the car stops feeling like transportation and starts feeling like a driver's tool. Under the hood was a 2.5-liter Duratec V6, tuned to roughly the high 100s to about 2 to 100 horsepower, depending on year, paired with a 5-speed manual that rewards commitment. It isn't a torque monster that impresses with one big shove. It's an eager engine that feels better the more you use it. The kind of powertrain that makes you stay in the throttle a little longer just because it feels happy doing it. But the real reason people remember the Contour SVT isn't the spec sheet, it's the chassis. This car has that rare front-wheel drive talent where you can place the nose exactly where you want it, feel the body settle, and carry speed through corners without the car begging you to back off. The steering feels direct, the suspension feels purposeful, and the balance is confident enough that you stop driving defensively and start driving precisely. On a twisty road, it doesn't feel like you're wrestling a sedan. It feels like you're guiding something smaller and more focused than it has any right to be. So why did it stay underrated? Timing and image. In that era, American performance conversations were dominated by louder icons, V8 pony cars, big horsepower headlines, and the cars that sounded fast even when they weren't. The Contour SVT didn't have the styling drama, the badge prestige, or the marketing myth to force its way into that conversation. And because the regular Contour was never a cultural superstar, the SVT version was always going to be a niche obsession. That's why it's such a perfect, underrated pick today. It's a car that rewards the driver more than the audience. It proves that some of the best American performance experiences are the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to drive them hard and finally get it. If you find a clean one, it still feels special in a way the brochure never promised. Number 21. Pontiac Vibe GT. The Pontiac Vibe GT is underrated because it never fit the story people wanted to tell about American performance cars. It wasn't loud. It wasn't muscular. It didn't look rebellious or dangerous. It looked sensible. And in car culture, sensible is often the fastest way to get ignored. But under that harmless hatchback shape was one of the smartest collaborations General Motors ever pulled off, and the GT version proves just how much people missed the point. Here's the part most people overlook. The Vibe wasn't really a typical Pontiac. It was the result of a rare GM-Toyota partnership built at the NUMMI plant in California, sharing its bones with the Toyota Matrix. That meant Toyota-level reliability mixed with an American brand that was supposed to be about excitement. The base Vibe leaned practical, but the GT flipped the personality completely. It came with a high-revving 1.8-liter engine tuned for enthusiasm rather than torque, paired with a 6-speed manual that encouraged you to actually work for the speed. This wasn't a car that impressed with instant shove. It impressed when you kept your foot in it and let the engine climb. What makes the Vibe GT especially underrated is how honest it feels. There's no fake aggression, no inflated numbers, no illusion that it's something it isn't. It's light on its feet, predictable, and playful in a way that rewards drivers who enjoy momentum rather than brute force. On a twisty road, it feels eager instead of stressed, and that eagerness is what separates good daily drivers from genuinely enjoyable ones. It's the kind of car that turns a boring commute into something engaging without demanding sacrifices everywhere else. And then there's the practicality factor, which quietly adds to its legend. The Vibe GT could haul gear, survive bad roads, handle long trips, and still be fun when you wanted it to be. Fold the seats down and it becomes a cargo mule. Wind it out through the gears and it feels like a budget hot hatch hiding in plain sight. That dual personality is exactly why owners tend to keep them for a long time, and why outsiders never quite understand the attachment. The real reason the Vibe GT stayed underrated is branding. Pontiac's image was built on muscle and attitude, not clever hatchbacks. And hatchbacks, especially in America at the time, were treated as appliances rather than enthusiast cars. So the Vibe GT slipped through the cracks, appreciated by the people who lived with it and ignored by almost everyone else. That's what makes it a true underrated car. It doesn't beg for attention. It earns loyalty. And years later, it still proves that fun doesn't always need a big engine or a dramatic shape. Sometimes it just needs the right balance, built quietly by people who understood what actually matters behind the wheel. Number 20. Chrysler Crossfire SRT6 MID 2000s. The Chrysler Crossfire SRT6 is one of those cars that got judged before anyone actually drove it, and the verdict was usually based on the badge and the styling. The regular Crossfire already confused people. Part retro, part concept car, part, what is this supposed to be? And then Chrysler did something even stranger. They made a version that was legitimately fast, legitimately engineered, and legitimately tied to Mercedes AMG hardware. The key to understanding the SRT6 is that it isn't a Chrysler pretending to be German. It's basically a Mercedes-Benz SLK's core mechanical recipe, remixed into Chrysler's body. Under the hood sits the supercharged 3.2-liter V6 from the AMG SLK 32, an engine known for effortless torque and that instant, dense punch you feel the moment you roll into the throttle. It doesn't need dramatic RPM to feel exciting. It has that big shove personality that makes highway merges feel like cheating and two-lane passing feel effortless. The supercharger whine is subtle, but it's there, and once you notice it, it becomes part of the car's character, like a quiet reminder that this thing is more serious than it looks. And the SRT6 isn't just an engine swap. Chrysler and SRT treated it like a real performance model. It got meaningful upgrades that changed the entire attitude of the car. Firmer suspension, bigger brakes, sharper responses, and a stance that looks lower and more purposeful. The handling isn't delicate like a featherweight roadster, but it has confidence. It feels planted at speed, stable through long sweepers, and composed when you lean on it. It's a grand tourer that can hustle when you want it to, rather than a pure track toy, and that's exactly why it feels so usable. So why is it underrated? Because it never had a clean identity. Purists dismissed it as a parts bin oddity. Chrysler fans didn't know what to do with something that felt so Mercedes underneath. The styling split opinions so hard that plenty of people wrote it off instantly. Add in the fact that it came only with an automatic, and the loudest enthusiast crowd moved on without giving it a fair shot. But that's exactly why the SRT6 has aged into a cult favorite. It's a rare moment where weird and good overlap. It's fast without trying to look like a supercar, special without being precious, and it delivers that addictive supercharged punch with a cool, highway-eating vibe you can actually live with. The Crossfire SRT6 is underrated because it doesn't fit a neat box, and cars that don't fit boxes often end up being the most interesting ones to own. Number 19. Buick Roadmaster Estate Wagon. The Buick Roadmaster Estate Wagon is underrated because it breaks every modern rule about what a cool performance vehicle is supposed to be. It's huge, it's soft, it's unapologetically suburban, and it looks like it should be parked outside a house with a bird bath and a porch swing. And yet, buried inside that rolling living room is one of the most American sleeper formulas ever sold. Big body comfort, body-on-frame toughness, and a V8 that quietly turns this wagon into a torque-soaked menace. To understand why the Roadmaster wagon matters, you have to remember what it represented in the early 1990s. This was the last era when an American family car could be genuinely massive without apologizing. 3 rows, a cargo area that feels like a studio apartment, a ride quality that doesn't handle bumps, it erases them. The Roadmaster is the kind of car where you don't drive over rough pavement, you float across it, while the suspension shrugs like it's bored. And then the mid-90s upgrade happens, and this is where the legend really forms. Buick drops the LT1-based 5.7-liter V8 into the wagon, the same basic family of engine used in performance icons of the era, and suddenly this thing has real muscle under the hood. It's not a peaky, high-strung experience. It's the opposite. It's effortless. You press the pedal and the wagon just moves, like gravity changed its mind. The power doesn't feel dramatic in a sports car way. It feels confident, heavy, unstoppable. That's the magic of torque in a big chassis. It turns slow-looking into surprisingly quick, without needing to scream for attention. The underrated part is that the Roadmaster wagon wasn't just fast in a straight line for a laugh. It was genuinely capable as an all-purpose machine. It could haul people, haul cargo, haul furniture, and tow like a vehicle that had no right being this comfortable. It's the kind of car that makes modern crossovers feel nervous, because the Roadmaster doesn't act like it's trying to be athletic. It acts like it's built to handle real life, with zero stress. And culturally, it never got its respect because it was a wagon, and wagons were treated like the least exciting shape you could buy. Buick didn't help either. Its image was comfort, not performance. So the Roadmaster became a punchline, then a nostalgia piece, and only later did people start realizing what it actually was. One of the last great American long-roof cruisers, with muscle car DNA hiding underneath. It's underrated because it's honest, ridiculous, and brilliant. And once you get it, you can't unsee how cool it really is. Number 18. Saturn S-Series, 1990s to early 2000s. The Saturn S-Series is underrated because it's easy to look at it as just an economy car, and then move on. But that's exactly what makes it such a perfect pick for this list. The S-Series wasn't just a product, it was an experiment. Saturn was General Motors trying to build a new kind of American car company from the ground up. Different culture, different dealer experience, different engineering priorities. And the S-Series was the proof that the idea could actually work in the real world. Start with what made these cars genuinely different: the body. Saturn leaned hard into polymer body panels, which meant everyday dings and parking lot dents weren't the automatic heartbreak they were on, typical steel-bodied compacts. That sounds like a small detail until you live with it. It changes the whole ownership vibe. The car feels like it's designed for real people with real lives, not just for a showroom photo. Underneath, the structure was a space frame approach that let Saturn do those panels and keep the car light and straightforward. It wasn't built to impress your neighbors. It was built to survive your routine. And the S-Series nailed its mission better than people remember. They were efficient, simple to run, and easy to understand. The engines weren't glamorous, but they were the kind of powertrains that could rack up miles if you treated them decently. The driving experience was honest. Light controls, predictable handling, and just enough responsiveness that the car didn't feel dead. In an era when a lot of cheap cars felt disposable, the S-Series felt like it had intention behind it. What really makes it underrated, though, is how much Saturn tried to change the relationship between Americans and buying a car. Saturn pushed that no-haggle style experience, and owners often talked about the brand like it was a community rather than just a badge. That kind of loyalty doesn't happen by accident. It happens when a company makes people feel respected, especially buyers who usually get ignored by the industry. Of course, the S-Series never became a mainstream enthusiast icon because it wasn't trying to be. And that's the trap. Car culture often equates great with fast or rare, and it forgets that greatness can also mean smart engineering, durability, and a car that does its job so well that it quietly earns love over time. The Saturn S-Series is underrated because it was a success in a category that rarely gets celebrated. It's a reminder that not every meaningful American car comes with a V8 and a poster. Some come with practicality, weirdly clever materials, and an identity built around doing the basics better than anyone expected. Number 17. Pontiac Fiero. The Pontiac Fiero is underrated because most people only remember the headline version of its story. They remember the jokes, the early problems, and the way it became a cultural punchline. But the real Fiero story is more interesting and it ends with a car that was genuinely turning into something special right when it got pulled off the stage. If you judge the Fiero by its reputation alone, you miss how ambitious it was, and how close Pontiac came to building a true American mid-engine sports car that could have had a much longer legacy. The Fiero's layout was the big deal. Mid-engine, rear-wheel drive, 2 seats, compact dimensions. That is not a normal recipe for an American mass-market car in the 1980s. Pontiac wasn't just chasing style, they were chasing a completely different driving feel. The early cars, though, were built with priorities that weren't purely performance, and that's where the misunderstanding begins. Pontiac initially pitched the Fiero as an efficient, sporty commuter, which meant the first engine most people associate with it is the 2.5-liter Iron Duke 4-cylinder. It was known for durability and decent everyday torque, not for thrilling top-end power. In other words, it made the car look sporty while driving like a practical compact. That mismatch hurt the Fiero's image immediately. But then Pontiac started turning the idea into what enthusiasts actually wanted. Later models offered a 2.8-liter V6 that gave the Fiero the power and character it deserved. Smoother, stronger acceleration, and a more satisfying, sports car-like feel. And the real reason the Fiero is underrated is that by the time you reach the later years, especially the final year, the car had evolved dramatically. Pontiac reworked the suspension for 1988, and that change transformed the handling reputation. The car became more composed, more predictable, and more genuinely fun to push. This is the version that makes people say, "Wait, this actually drives well." So why is it still underrated? Because the early reputation never let go, and the Fiero didn't get time to complete its redemption arc. The moment Pontiac finally had the chassis sorted and the identity clearer, the car was canceled. That's why the Fiero feels like unfinished business. It's a car that started as a compromise, then fought its way toward greatness. Today, the Fiero deserves credit for being brave. It was a mid-engine American experiment that actually made it to production, and it proved Pontiac had real imagination. The best Fieros, especially the later ones, aren't just nostalgia. They're a reminder that sometimes a car's reputation is stuck in its weakest chapter, while its best chapter gets ignored. Number 16. Chevrolet Cobalt SS Turbo, late 2000s. The Chevrolet Cobalt SS Turbo is one of the most misunderstood performance cars America ever built, because almost everyone heard the name Cobalt and immediately tuned out. It was supposed to be a cheap compact, an economy car that filled rental fleets and teenage driveways. But in the late 2000s, Chevrolet quietly decided to give it the kind of serious engineering attention usually reserved for Corvettes, and the result was something that could hang with, and even embarrass, cars far more expensive and respected. Let's start with the numbers. The Cobalt SS Turbo used a 2.0-liter Ecotec 4-cylinder with direct injection and a turbocharger, producing around 260 horsepower and 260 lb-ft of torque. That was serious firepower in a lightweight front-wheel drive shell. But what made it special wasn't just the output, it was the way the car used it. The torque curve was broad and meaty, the throttle response was crisp, and the balance between grip and manageability was shockingly good for something that looked so ordinary. Chevrolet's engineers even tuned the chassis on the Nürburgring, and their work paid off. The Cobalt SS Turbo clocked an official lap time around 8 minutes, 22 seconds, at one point making it one of the fastest front-wheel drive production cars on the planet. That's not a typo. A front-drive Chevy compact, built in America, earning legitimate respect on one of the world's toughest racetracks. And the best part? It wasn't a stripped-out, one-off special. It was a regular production car you could buy at your local dealership, complete with air conditioning and a warranty. It had Brembo brakes, Recaro-inspired seats, and a limited slip differential that gave it poise you'd never expect from something with this badge. So why did it stay underrated? Because image kills perception. The Cobalt name was synonymous with cheap transportation, and enthusiasts tend to look down on anything that doesn't have heritage or prestige baked into the marketing. The SS Turbo's achievements never fit that narrative. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, and it came from a brand everyone thought had already moved past small car performance. But the people who've actually driven one know this car was no joke. It handled, it braked, it boosted, and it delivered the kind of feedback you usually have to pay twice as much to experience. The Chevrolet Cobalt SS Turbo is underrated because it shattered expectations quietly. It didn't beg for credibility. It earned it one lap, one corner, and one shock driver at a time. Number 15. Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe, late 1980s. The Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe is underrated because it sits in a weird blind spot of car culture. It's not a classic muscle car, so the VIII crowd rarely talks about it. It's not a pure sports car, so the lightweight roadster crowd overlooks it too. And yet, in the late 1980s, when American performance was still climbing out of the emissions-era hangover, Ford quietly built a sleek, aerodynamic coupe that delivered real speed the smart way, with boost, balance, and highway confidence. At the heart of the Turbo Coupe was Ford's turbocharged 2.3-liter four-cylinder. And the important part isn't the displacement, it's the attitude. This engine was all about mid-range punch and that addictive surge when the turbo came alive. In its best form, especially paired with the manual transmission, it made the car feel quicker than people expected from a personal luxury Thunderbird. The power wasn't dramatic in a loud tire-frying way. It was more like a strong wave that kept building, perfect for rolling acceleration and long pulls on the freeway. That made it feel grown up fast, like a car built for real roads, not just magazine numbers. But the Turbo Coupe's real party trick was that it didn't rely on power alone. Ford gave it the kind of supporting upgrades that separate a sporty trim from an actual performance package. A tighter suspension tune, sharper road manners, and braking hardware that felt serious for the era. The result was a car you could drive hard without it instantly turning into a floaty barge. It had that stable-at-speed personality, confident in sweepers, composed on rough highways, and planted in a way that made you want to keep going. If you've ever driven a car that feels like it was designed for late-night interstates and wide-open two-lanes, you know the vibe. Effortless, smooth, and secretly quick. So why is it underrated? Because the badge and the shape lied to people. Thunderbird sounded like comfort. The body looked like luxury. And the idea of a Turbo 4 in an American coupe didn't match what most enthusiasts were trained to respect back then. But the Turbo Coupe was Ford showing that performance could be engineered, not just displaced. Today, it reads like a preview of the modern performance world. Smaller engine, forced induction, real chassis tuning, hidden inside a car everyone assumed was just a cruiser. And that mismatch between reality and reputation is exactly what makes it a perfect, underrated legend. Number 14. AMC Eagle, 1980s. The AMC Eagle is underrated because it's one of those cars that was quietly right about the future, years before the future showed up and took credit. In the 1980s, when all-wheel drive still sounded like something for tractors, rally cars, or serious off-road rigs, AMC looked at everyday America and said, what if the average person could have car comfort, wagon practicality, and winter-proof traction in one package? That idea is so normal today that it's almost invisible. Yet back then, it was a genuinely bold move. The Eagle wasn't a truck pretending to be a car. It was basically a normal AMC passenger car that got lifted, reinforced, and fitted with a full-time four-wheel drive system. You could get it as a wagon, a sedan, even a quirky hatchback. And the pitch was simple. Same daily usability, but now you can handle snow, mud, rain, and bad roads without turning your commute into a white-knuckle event. In other words, it was the crossover blueprint before anyone used the word crossover. What makes it truly underrated is that AMC didn't just stumble into the concept, they committed to it. The Eagle had a stance that looked tougher than a standard wagon, ground clearance that actually helped, and the kind of go-anywhere confidence that made sense for real people living through real weather. It wasn't flashy, but it was practical in the most satisfying way. The kind of practicality that feels like a superpower the first time you drive past stuck cars on a snowy incline. It's the opposite of an attention-seeking car. It's a problem-solving car. And yet, the Eagle never became a household legend because AMC didn't have the marketing muscle to turn it into a cultural icon. Bigger companies watched the idea, waited until the market was ready, and then built entire empires on the same formula. That's the painful part. The Eagle didn't fail because it was a bad concept. It got overshadowed because it was early, and because AMC was fighting for survival in an industry that rewards the loudest megaphones. Today, the Eagle feels like a time capsule from a smarter timeline. It's not fast, and it's not refined by modern standards, but it has a personality you can't fake. Honest mechanicals, a clear purpose, and a design that exists because someone solved a real problem. The AMC Eagle is underrated because it deserves to be remembered not as a quirky footnote, but as the car that predicted what millions of people would eventually buy every single day. Number 13. Pontiac Grand Prix GTP, late 1990s to 2000s. The Pontiac Grand Prix GTP is underrated because it lived in that perfect sweet spot. Fast enough to surprise people, comfortable enough to daily drive, and common enough that most of the world never stopped to appreciate what it was. When people talk late 1990s and early 2000s American performance, the conversation usually jumps straight to VIII icons or to the golden age stuff from decades earlier. Meanwhile, the GTP was out here doing something more realistic and more dangerous in traffic. It was a modern, supercharged torque machine hiding inside a normal-looking mid-size Pontiac. The heart of the GTP was that supercharged 3.8-liter V6, an engine that didn't chase drama, it chased results. The power delivery is what made it special. You didn't need high revs, you didn't need perfect conditions, and you didn't need to be on the cam like a peaky performance engine. You just rolled into the throttle and the car surged forward with that heavy, confident shove that makes you laugh because it feels like the car is stronger than it looks. It wasn't trying to be a delicate canyon carver. It was built to dominate the real world. Stoplight pulls, on-ramps, highway passes, and those moments where you're already moving fast, but the car still has more to give. And the GTP's underrated genius was that it wrapped all that punch in something people underestimated. It looked like a commuter coupe or sedan. It blended into parking lots. It didn't scream performance unless you knew what the badges meant. That's why it became such a cult favorite among people who actually drove them hard. Because the GTP wasn't a car you admired from a distance. It was a car you used, and it rewarded you every single day. It also had that era's Pontiac personality, sporty without being punishing. The ride was comfortable enough for long trips. The cabin had that early 2000s fighter jet vibe in the best way, and you could get features that made it feel special for the money. Most importantly, it had an aftermarket scene that turned it into a gateway drug. Once people realized what a pulley change, exhaust tweaks, and basic supporting mods could do, the GTP developed a reputation for being one of the easiest regular cars to turn into a problem for much more expensive machines. So why isn't it remembered like a legend? Because it didn't fit the traditional performance narrative. It was front-wheel drive. It wasn't rare. It wasn't a halo car. But that's exactly why it's underrated. It represents the kind of American performance that actually mattered to most drivers. Strong, usable, affordable speed that you could live with. The Grand Prix GTP didn't need a poster. It needed an open road and a driver who understood what torque feels like. Number 12. Lincoln Mark VIII, 1990s. The Lincoln Mark VIII is underrated because people hear Lincoln and immediately assume it's only about soft seats and golf course cruising. And yes, the Mark VIII can cruise like a luxury coupe should. But that reputation hides what the car really was. in the 1990s. A surprisingly serious grand tourer with real performance hardware, a genuinely advanced engine, and a personality that makes a lot more sense once you drive one at speed instead of judging it from a parking lot. Start with the heart of the car, because this is where the Mark VIII earns its respect. Under the hood was Ford's 4.6-liter DOHC modular V8, essentially a close relative of the same engine architecture that powered performance icons of the era. In the Mark VIII, it made around 280 horsepower, and more importantly, it delivered that smooth, eager, high-revving feel that most people do not expect from a big American luxury coupe. This isn't a lazy, low-rev truck motor. It's a refined, modern V8 that likes to spin, with a sound that's more sophisticated than muscle car loud, like the car is confident enough not to shout. And the Mark VIII's underrated magic is the way it carries speed. The body is sleek and aerodynamic for its era, and the whole car was clearly designed for long-distance, high-speed comfort. The ride quality is plush, but not sloppy in the way older luxury coupes could be. It feels planted and stable on the highway, and it has that grand touring vibe where the car seems to relax as speeds climb. The steering isn't razor-sharp sports car communication, but it's controlled, and the chassis has enough composure that you can hustle it without the car feeling like it's falling apart. Part of that character comes from the Mark VIII's air suspension, which gave it that smooth, floating luxury feel, while still keeping the stance and stability it needed. When everything is working properly, it makes the car feel expensive and special in a way that steel springs from the era often couldn't. It's also one of the reasons people underestimate it today. Maintenance stories scared off buyers, and any car with complicated luxury tech can get labeled trouble, even when it's fundamentally brilliant. That's why the Mark VIII stayed underrated. It wasn't a Mustang, and it wasn't trying to be. It lived in a space Americans didn't celebrate enough, the fast luxury coupe that does distance better than almost anything else. If you're expecting a sleepy Lincoln, you're in for a surprise. The Mark VIII is a reminder that the 1990s produced some genuinely advanced American cars with real engineering ambition, if you look beyond the usual legends. Number 11. Cadillac CTS Wagon, 2000s to early 2010s. The Cadillac CTS Wagon is underrated because it's the kind of car America claims it wants: practical, fast, stylish, premium, and then barely buys when it actually exists. In a market that was already shifting hard toward SUVs, Cadillac quietly dropped one of the coolest, enthusiast-friendly shapes you could get in the late 2000s and early 2010s. A real rear-wheel drive luxury wagon that didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like a statement. The first reason the CTS wagon matters is that it wasn't built on some soft, front-wheel drive platform pretending to be sporty. It was part of Cadillac's era of serious chassis development, when the brand was trying to prove it could compete with German sports sedans on driving feel, not just leather quality. That Sigma platform foundation gave it the right bones: balanced proportions, confident stability, and the kind of steering and suspension tuning that makes the car feel connected instead of floaty. Even in normal driving, it has that solid, composed, it-wants-to-be-driven personality. And when you push it, it doesn't fall apart. It tightens up. Then there's the wagon advantage, which most people still underestimate. A wagon isn't just a sedan with extra space. It changes how you live with the car. The CTS wagon can do airport runs, road trips, and daily errands with zero drama, and still feel like a proper performance-oriented luxury car behind the wheel. You don't sit high like an SUV. You sit low in a cockpit that feels more direct and engaging. It's the same reason enthusiasts romanticize European wagons. You get the usefulness without giving up the driving experience. And the CTS wagon had range. Even the regular versions offered strong power and a premium feel. But the real cult energy comes from the higher performance trims, especially when people realize there was a V-Series wagon at all. That's the kind of car that should have been an instant legend. supercharged muscle, rear-wheel drive attitude, and wagon practicality in one package. It's absurd in the best way. Like Cadillac looked at the idea of family car and decided it could be both responsible and completely unhinged. So why is it underrated? Because wagons were never cool in America the way they were in Europe, and the CTS wagon arrived when the average buyer was already convinced that practical meant SUV. It didn't help that Cadillac's brand identity was still evolving. Some people couldn't shake the old stereotypes, even though the product had genuinely changed. That's what makes it such a perfect underrated pick. The CTS wagon is a rare car that offers a full package, luxury, style, driving feel, real usefulness, without turning into a bland blob. It's the kind of vehicle people will look back on and say, "Wait, Cadillac made that? Why didn't more people buy it?" And the answer is simple. The market wasn't ready to appreciate how brilliant it was. Number 10. Ford Flex EcoBoost, 2000s to early 2010s. The Ford Flex EcoBoost is underrated because it looks like the last thing that should be fast. It's a big, boxy family hauler with straight lines, a long roof, and the vibe of something designed to be useful, not exciting. And that's exactly why it works as a modern American sleeper. Nobody expects it to move, and then it does. Hard. The Flex is what happens when practicality and performance get stitched together without any need to impress strangers. In EcoBoost form, the Flex gets a twin-turbo V6 that turns this 3-row living room on wheels into something that can genuinely surprise people. The power doesn't feel like a high-rev sports car. It feels like effortless thrust, torque arriving early, strong acceleration without drama, and a confidence that makes passing and merging feel almost unfair. It's the kind of speed you use, not the kind you pose with. The Flex doesn't need to scream about horsepower because the experience is simple. Press the pedal, and the big box just surges forward like it lost weight. What makes it especially underrated is that the Flex doesn't rely on a fake performance persona. It isn't pretending to be rugged, or off-road capable, or sporty in the way crossovers try to advertise themselves. It's honest. Low roofline, long wheelbase, stable ride, and a cabin built for real life. Kids, luggage, road trips, groceries, and long days. It's comfortable and quiet in the way a true family vehicle should be, but the EcoBoost powertrain adds this second personality that's always waiting underneath. You can cruise like a minivan substitute, then instantly turn it into a highway missile when you need to. And culturally, the Flex got ignored because it didn't fit the trends. SUVs were the fantasy product. Tall, aggressive, adventure branding. The Flex was the realistic product. Space and comfort without pretending you're climbing mountains every weekend. People also judged it for the shape, which is hilarious because the shape is part of why it's so good. That long, boxy design delivers real usable space and a planted feel on the road, instead of the top-heavy wobble some tall SUVs can have. The Flex EcoBoost is underrated because it's a secret weapon for people who want everything at once: room, comfort, and speed, without paying the social tax of driving something that looks like it's trying too hard. It's one of the rare family cars that feels genuinely clever because it gives you exactly what you need, then gives you a little extra thrill on top, and it does it quietly. That's the definition of an underrated modern classic. Number 9. Buick Regal GS, early 2010s. The Buick Regal GS is underrated because it showed up with the wrong badge at the wrong time. In the early 2010s, Buick still carried that stubborn stereotype: comfortable cars for people who weren't chasing performance. So when Buick released a sport-oriented sedan with real power, real chassis tuning, and genuine long-distance confidence, a lot of enthusiasts didn't even give it a fair look. They saw the tri-shield and assumed the car was soft. The Regal GS is proof that assumption was lazy. The GS wasn't trying to be a track day trophy. It was trying to be a serious, fast daily driver, something you could commute in comfortably, then take the long way home without feeling like you were piloting an appliance. Under the hood was a turbocharged 2-liter 4-cylinder, putting out strong, usable power, with torque arriving early and staying present through the mid-range. That matters because it changes how the car feels in the real world. You don't have to wring it out to make progress. It pulls with confidence in normal driving. And when you lean into it, it builds speed in that smooth, modern turbo way that feels effortless instead of frantic. What really makes the Regal GS underrated is the balance. Buick tuned it to feel stable and planted, the kind of car that feels best eating highway miles, but still has enough control to stay composed on twisty roads. The steering and suspension don't feel like a luxury car that got stiffened as an afterthought. The car has that buttoned-down personality, where it feels solid through corners and calm over rough pavement. It's not the sharpest knife in the performance sedan drawer, but it's one of the more livable ones, and that's the point. You can drive it hard without it beating you up. Then there's the sleeper factor. The Regal GS doesn't shout. It doesn't have the aggressive image of the usual sports sedan suspects, and that's why it slips under the radar. From the outside, most people see nice Buick, not quick turbo sedan. That gives it a very specific kind of appeal. You get performance without attention. No constant challenges at stoplights. No look at me vibe. Just a car that quietly does the job better than people expect. And that's why it deserves more respect. The Regal GS is the kind of car that makes you question how many good vehicles get ignored simply because the badge doesn't match the stereotype. It's not a headline car. It's a real-world car. Comfortable, confident, quicker than it looks, and built for drivers who want speed they can actually use every day. Number 8. Pontiac Solstice GXP, mid-2000s. The Pontiac Solstice GXP is underrated because it arrived during a weird moment when Pontiac was fighting for relevance and the market didn't know how to value fun. On paper, it should have been an instant modern classic, a compact, rear-wheel drive roadster with turbo power, sharp styling, and that affordable weekend car energy people say they want. But in reality, the Solstice got trapped between two worlds. It wasn't as universally loved as the Miata, and it didn't have the premium badge appeal of a Boxster. So it became the car people noticed, then forgot, while the drivers who actually lived with one quietly realized it was way better than its reputation. The GXP is the one that matters because it fixes the Solstice's biggest problem, power. The turbocharged 2-liter gives the car a completely different personality. Instead of feeling like a stylish cruiser, it becomes a punchy little weapon with real mid-range shove. It's the kind of boost that transforms the experience, short bursts of acceleration that make the car feel lighter than it is, passing power that shows up instantly, and a playful slingshot vibe when the turbo hits. You don't have to drive it like a hero to enjoy it. The car delivers excitement even at normal speeds, which is exactly what a roadster is supposed to do. And being rear-wheel drive matters here. It gives the Solstice GXP that classic sports car feel. The nose bites, the rear follows, and you can feel the car rotate when you ask it to. It's not the most delicate chassis ever built, and it's not the most refined, but it has character. It feels mechanical and honest, like a car that wants you to be involved. That involvement is what makes it special. A lot of modern performance cars are so perfect, they feel sterile. The Solstice GXP isn't sterile. It feels alive. So why is it underrated? Because it had real compromises. The cabin is tight, visibility isn't great, and the trunk opening is famously awkward. Practicality was not the mission. Plus, Pontiac's collapse put a shadow over the whole car. Like buying one meant buying into a dead story. But here's the twist. Those very factors helped keep it underrated in the market, which is why enthusiasts who want something different keep circling back. The Solstice GXP is underrated because it delivers a real sports car experience without the usual sports car price or prestige. It's stylish, boosted, rear-drive fun, with an unmistakably mid-2000s vibe, and it's one of the last times Pontiac built a car that felt like it was made to chase excitement first. If you judge it by badge or practicality, you miss it. If you judge it by how it makes you feel on a back road, it suddenly makes perfect sense. Number 7. Dodge Magnum SRT8, mid-2000s. The Dodge Magnum SRT8 is underrated because America never really knew what to do with a wagon that refused to be polite. Wagons here were supposed to be slow, sensible, and slightly embarrassing, something you inherited, not something you bragged about. And then Dodge showed up in the mid-2000s and basically said, "What if we built a long-roof family hauler and gave it muscle car power?" The result was a car that should have been celebrated as a modern classic from day one, but instead lived as a weird cult favorite for people who understood the joke and loved it. The Magnum's biggest flex is simple: the 6.1-liter Hemi V8. In SRT8 form, it made serious power and delivered it in the most satisfying way possible. Big torque, instant response, and that deep, aggressive sound that makes the car feel like it's always ready to throw down. This isn't a high-revving sports car experience. It's the classic American push-you-back-in-the-seat feeling, except it's happening in a vehicle shaped like it should be hauling strollers and groceries. That contrast is the entire appeal. It's practical on the outside and completely unhinged underneath. What makes it even more underrated is that the SRT8 wasn't just an engine swap. Dodge backed up the power with real supporting hardware. The suspension was tightened, the brakes were upgraded, and the whole package had that heavy, planted confidence that makes it feel stable at speed. On the highway, it's the perfect kind of fast. Relaxed when cruising, then instantly violent when you dip into the throttle. It's a road trip missile that can swallow luggage, carry passengers comfortably, and still turn an empty on-ramp into a moment you remember. So why didn't it become a bigger legend? Timing and culture. SUVs were already taking over, and wagons were still treated like a punchline in the USS. The Magnum also had polarizing styling. Some people loved the bold shape, others thought it looked too strange to take seriously. And because Dodge's performance identity was mostly tied to coupes, and later the Charger, the Magnum didn't get the spotlight it deserved. But that's exactly why it's underrated today. The Magnum SRT8 represents a rare, disappearing idea. A true muscle wagon. A car that gives you the usefulness of a family vehicle without sacrificing attitude, sound, or speed. It's the kind of car that makes enthusiasts grin, because it feels like Dodge built it for people who love cars, not trends. And once you understand what it is, a practical beast with a V8 heartbeat, it stops being weird and starts being brilliant. Number 6. Mercury Marauder, early 2000s. The Mercury Marauder is underrated because it arrived like a time traveler. In the early 2000s, the market was already drifting toward SUVs, and big American sedans were slowly losing their cultural spotlight. But Mercury decided to revive an old name and build something that felt like a modernized muscle sedan. A full-size, rear-wheel drive, 4-door, with attitude, presence, and the kind of V8 character that makes every on-ramp feel like your private stage. It should have been a bigger deal than it was. The Marauder's personality starts with the platform. It's built on the Panther chassis, the same tough, body-on-frame foundation that gave us the Crown Victoria and Grand Marquis. That matters because it gives the Marauder a very specific feel: solid, heavy, and confident. Like a car designed to take abuse and keep going. It doesn't feel delicate, it feels durable. And in a world of increasingly soft front-wheel drive sedans, that rear drive, big body layout instantly made it stand out. Then you get to the engine. A 4.6-liter DOHC V8, making around 3 to 100 horsepower, which gave the Marauder a smoother, more high-revving character than the usual low-output fleet sedans people associated with the platform. It wasn't the fastest thing on paper compared to true sports cars, but it wasn't trying to be. It was trying to be a fast sedan, something you could drive every day, haul people comfortably, and still have the kind of punch that makes you grin when the light turns green. What really made the Marauder special and underrated was the vibe. The styling leaned dark and aggressive for the era, with that blackout look that made it feel like an unmarked police car with a performance secret. It had the stance and presence of something serious, and because it wasn't common, it had instant mystique. People who didn't know what it was would just sense that it looked different. People who did know would give it that nod of respect, like recognizing a fellow enthusiast in a crowd. So why is it underrated? Because Mercury, as a brand, didn't have the performance credibility to sell the fantasy. Most buyers couldn't justify a niche muscle sedan when SUVs were taking over and mainstream sedans were getting cheaper and softer. It didn't help that it was a relatively short-lived model, which kept it from building the kind of long-term legend a Mustang or Camaro naturally gets. But the Marauder's appeal has only grown. Today, it represents something rare, an honest, big, rear-drive VIII sedan built with real personality. It's underrated because it was one of the last cars of its kind before the world moved on, and the people who love them know exactly what they're holding on to. Number 5. Oldsmobile Aurora, mid to late 1990s. The Oldsmobile Aurora is underrated because it was trying to reinvent an entire brand in real time, and it did a better job than people remember. By the mid to late 1990s, Oldsmobile was fighting a brutal image problem. The public had already decided what Oldsmobile meant, and it wasn't modern, premium, or exciting. So when the Aurora arrived, it wasn't just another sedan. It was a statement: sleek styling, advanced engineering, and a very clear message that Oldsmobile wanted to play in the near-luxury space alongside the imports everyone was suddenly obsessed with. Design-wise, the Aurora felt like Oldsmobile stepping into a new decade early. It had smooth, aerodynamic lines and a clean, upscale look that didn't rely on old-school chrome tricks. It looked contemporary in a way a lot of American sedans didn't at the time, and it carried itself like something meant to be taken seriously. Inside, it aimed for a more premium experience too, quiet, comfortable, and loaded in a way that made it feel like a flagship, not a compromise. And the engine is a huge part of why the Aurora deserves more respect. The first-generation Aurora launched with a 4.0-liter DOHC V8 that was closely related to Cadillac's Northstar family. It made around 250 horsepower and delivered that smooth, refined power delivery you'd expect from a modern luxury V8, eager at higher revs, quiet when cruising, and confident when you leaned into it. It wasn't built to feel like a muscle car. It was built to feel sophisticated. The whole experience was more European-style highway runner than stoplight bruiser, and that made it different from the typical American V8 sedan formula. Later, Oldsmobile also offered a 3.5-liter DOHC V6 in the second-generation Aurora, which kept the car competitive and efficient, but enthusiasts usually remember the original V8 version as the one with the real flagship soul. The V8 Aurora felt like Oldsmobile showing what it could do when it stopped playing safe. So why is the Aurora underrated? Because it arrived too late to save the brand's reputation, and too early to become a nostalgic hero. People didn't trust Oldsmobile's future, so they didn't emotionally invest in its best work. The Aurora ended up remembered more as one of the last Oldsmobiles than as the genuinely ambitious, well-engineered sedan it actually was. And that's the tragedy, and the reason it belongs on this list. Number 4. Chevrolet Caprice PPV, 2010. The Chevrolet Caprice PPV is underrated because most people never even got the chance to want one. It wasn't marketed like a normal car, it wasn't sitting in shiny showroom lines begging for attention, and in many places it was essentially invisible unless you were looking at a police fleet. But underneath that plain, authoritative shape was one of the last, truly old-school, rear-wheel drive American sedans, only with a modern, globally engineered twist. The Caprice PPV that arrived around 2010 was based on a Holden platform from Australia, which immediately explains why it feels different from the typical American sedan of that era. It was built to handle high speeds, long hours, heavy use, and rough treatment. Because police vehicles don't get babied. They idle for ages, get slammed over potholes, run hot, carry extra weight, and still need to feel stable at speed. That kind of mission creates a certain toughness you can't fake, and it also creates a weird kind of appeal. The PPV wasn't built to impress you in a test drive. It was built to survive a job. And yes, the engine is a huge part of why it's worth talking about. The most desirable powertrain is the VIII, a 6.0-liter small block, the L77, rated around 355 horsepower and 384 lb-ft of torque. That's serious, usable muscle, delivered in the most satisfying way possible. Strong low-end pull, effortless mid-range, and the kind of smooth, confident acceleration that makes highway passing feel instant. There was also a V6 option in fleet use, but the VIII is the one that turns the Caprice into a true sleeper because it gives the car that big sedan that secretly moves personality. What makes the Caprice PPV especially underrated is the way it drives for its size. It's stable, planted, and composed, with a long wheelbase feel that makes it confident in sweepers and calm at higher speeds. You can tell it was engineered for control, not just comfort. Even its proportions, big, wide, and serious, give it a presence modern sedans rarely have anymore. So why is it underrated? Because it wasn't a mainstream enthusiast product, it was a tool. Most people only saw it in the rearview mirror and associated it with flashing lights, not performance value. But today, that's exactly why it stands out. The Caprice PPV is one of the last chances to experience a modern, rear-drive, VIII full-size sedan with a built-to-work attitude, an accidental hero from the era when America was quietly saying goodbye to cars like this. Number 3. Chevrolet SS, mid-2010s. The Chevrolet SS is underrated because it might be the best modern American performance sedan that almost nobody noticed while it was on sale. It looks ordinary on purpose, like a rental spec midsize four-door, and that plainness is exactly what kept it invisible. In the mid-2010s, attention went to flashy muscle cars, big SUVs, and anything that screamed performance from a mile away. The SS did the opposite. It hid world-class hardware under an anonymous suit, and if you didn't know what it was, you'd never guess how serious it really was. The engine is the core of the SS's personality, a 6.2-liter LS3 VIII, the same basic family of powerplant used in the Corvette of the era. In the SS, it made about 415 horsepower, delivered with that classic LS smoothness and instant torque. It doesn't feel peaky or fragile. It feels effortless, like the car is always operating below its limit. You tap the throttle at highway speed, and it surges forward with the kind of authority that makes passing feel almost ridiculous. It's the perfect real-world engine. Quiet when you want it, explosive when you don't. But what makes the SS truly underrated is that it isn't just an engine in a sedan. The whole car was built on a rear-wheel drive platform sourced from Holden, and it drives like a proper performance car. The steering feels more direct than you'd expect from a big four-door. The chassis stays planted and confident, and the balance makes it feel stable even when you're carrying speed through corners. It's the rare sedan that can do everything: daily commute, road trip, backroad fun, without feeling like a compromise in any of those roles. You can cruise comfortably with passengers, then find a twisty stretch and realize you're basically driving a four-door muscle GT car with real composure. So why didn't it become a bigger icon? Because it didn't advertise itself. The SS name itself confused people. SS sounded like a trim level, not a model. The styling was too subtle. The price was higher than casual buyers expected, and Chevrolet didn't really tell the story loudly enough to make the public care. That meant the SS became a secret handshake car, the kind of thing enthusiasts respect deeply, while everyone else drives past it without noticing. That's what makes it a perfect underrated pick. The Chevrolet SS is one of the last great naturally aspirated VIII rear-wheel drive sedans of its era. Fast, balanced, and shockingly usable. It didn't fail because it wasn't good. It stayed underrated because it was too honest, too quiet, and too adult for a market that wanted drama. And now, looking back, it's the kind of car people wish they'd recognized before it disappeared. Number 2. Ford Taurus SHO. Late 1980s to early 1990s. The Ford Taurus SHO is underrated because it was a performance car disguised so well that even today, people struggle to believe it was real. In the late 1980s, the Taurus was the definition of normal, America's sensible family sedan, the car you bought because you needed transportation, not excitement. And then, Ford teamed up with Yamaha and created something that basically rewired expectations. A sleeper sedan that could run with sports cars while looking like it belonged in an office parking lot. The magic starts with the engine. The original Taurus SHO used a 3.0-liter DOHC V6, developed with Yamaha, making about 220 horsepower. That doesn't sound insane now, but in that era, inside a front-wheel drive family sedan, it was a shock. More importantly, it wasn't a typical American torque motor. It had a smooth, eager character that loved to rev, with a top-end pull that made the car feel more sophisticated than its plain exterior suggested. It sounded different too, cleaner, sharper, almost exotic compared to most domestic sedans of the time. And because it was paired with a 5-speed manual, the whole package felt like a secret handshake for people who actually enjoyed driving. What made the SHO truly special wasn't just straight-line speed. It was the fact that you could live with it like a normal Taurus, then suddenly unleash a completely different personality. Around town, it behaved like a comfortable daily driver. But once you got into the power band, it transformed. Quick throttle response, a strong rush to redline, and the kind of "this shouldn't be happening" acceleration that makes you grin. It wasn't a delicate sports car, but it had enough chassis tuning and composure to feel planted at speed, especially for a sedan designed to carry families and groceries. So why is it underrated? Because it didn't come with the usual performance car signals. No aggressive bodywork, no loud image, no muscle car mythology. Enthusiasts in that era were trained to respect V8s, rear-wheel drive, and bold styling. The SHO offered none of that. It was stealth performance. And stealth performance often gets overlooked because people don't know what they're looking at until it's already gone. The Taurus SHO also matters historically. It helped popularize the idea that a practical sedan could be genuinely fast without sacrificing comfort, reliability, or everyday usability. That philosophy is everywhere now. Sports sedans, hot hatches, turbo family cars. But the SHO was doing it early, and doing it with a weirdly advanced engine that gave it a personality far bigger than its badge. That's why it deserves more love. It wasn't just a fast Taurus. It was a factory-built surprise. And it proved that the most dangerous performance cars aren't always the loud ones. They're the ones nobody expects. Number 1. Pontiac G8 GXP, 2009. The Pontiac G8 GXP is underrated because it showed up like a perfect answer right as Pontiac's entire story was ending. In 2009, the market was still recovering, buyers were cautious, and big performance sedans weren't exactly the priority. But Pontiac delivered one of the most complete modern muscle sedan packages America had seen in years. Rear-wheel drive, serious power, real balance, and then the brand disappeared. That timing turned the G8 GXP into a cult legend instead of the mainstream hero it deserved to be. At the center of it all is the engine, the 6.2-liter LS3 VIII, the same basic powerhouse used in the Corvette of that era. In the G8 GXP, it made about 415 horsepower, and the character was exactly what you want from an LS3: instant torque, smooth pull, and that effortless, confident surge that makes the car feel strong no matter what speed you're already doing. It doesn't need to scream to feel fast. It just goes. And because it's in a sedan body, that power feels even more shocking. You're sitting in a comfortable four-door, and it accelerates like something that should have two fewer doors and a lot more attention. But the G8 GXP isn't just engine in a sedan. The chassis mattered. Built on a rear-drive platform sourced from Holden, it had the right bones for performance: stable, planted, and willing. The steering and suspension tuning gave it that rare quality where it could cruise calmly like a daily driver, then tighten up the moment you pushed it. It felt composed in corners in a way that surprised people who assumed American sedan performance meant only straight-line speed. This car could actually be driven hard without feeling like it was fighting you. It also had the details that make enthusiasts care: available 6-speed manual, serious brakes, and a stance that looked purposeful without being cartoonish. It wasn't trying to be a luxury car first, and it wasn't trying to be a track special either. It was trying to be the ultimate real-world performance sedan: fast, usable, practical, and fun. So why is it underrated? Because it never got the long runway to build a reputation. Pontiac's shutdown turned it into a what-could-have-been car almost immediately. That meant fewer people experienced it, fewer people talked about it, and it never got the second-generation or long-term legacy that would have cemented it as an all-time great. Instead, it became a rare sight and a secret handshake among enthusiasts. The Pontiac G8 GXP is underrated because it represents a peak moment, one of the last times you could buy a big, naturally aspirated VIII rear-wheel drive sedan that felt genuinely alive. It didn't just deserve more sales, it deserved more time. That wraps up our 25 most underrated American cars in history, a reminder that real greatness doesn't always get the spotlight. If you enjoyed this kind of research-driven car storytelling, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into overlooked legends, forgotten performance, and the cars that deserved a second chance. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.